Okay, so hello, my name is Matt Rose. I'm a technical support engineer. So that was some great debugging you just saw. I'm a senior technical support engineer at GitHub. I've been there for just under 5 years. And before that, I didn't work in tech at all. I spent 6 years working as an employability skills tutor. So basically giving people training in how to write a CV, how to behave in job interviews. Okay. And yeah. Okay, we'll get to the slides in a second. Yeah, so basically, yes, I was an employability skills tutor. I spent my whole time giving people the skills they need to succeed in job interviews. And so it's great to be able to use those skills from my past and to help other people get into tech. So let's share the screen. Can you see these slides? Yep. Okay. So I am going to talk. Yes, in this session, then I am going to give you some context as to how to think and feel about a job interview, what to keep in your mind while you're in there so that you can give your best performance possible. There are a lot of unwritten rules to job interviews, and unless you think clearly and explicitly about them, they probably wouldn't occur to you. I'm also going to give you a technique for how to prepare your answers in advance. You can spend some time before the interview working on your answers, and then regardless of how exactly they phrase the question, you should be able to get some use out of the answers you have prepared. And yes, hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and hopefully I won't destroy the system or otherwise cost us more time than I already have done. This session is called UI Your Interview, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense taken in isolation. It barely makes sense when it's linked with the previous session that we already mentioned, which is UX Your Interview. I basically wanted to pass on all the things I'd learned in my previous career, and I framed them in terms of user experience and user interface design, because I thought that would be cute, but I'm not a UX or a UI researcher. I've only got a passing knowledge of those topics. And UI Your Interview, the metaphor is becoming increasingly stretched, but we'll run with it. It's fine. So yes, the UX Your CV session is available on the You Got This website, and there was a link to it in chat, and I imagine it'll be shared again. In this talk, I'm going to be using the principles of user interface design as I understand them and applying them to the job interview. So in this metaphor, who is the user? It's not us. Like when you are in an interview, it's very, very easy to get deep into your head and to become very self-conscious because after all, you're literally being judged. But you are not the user. We want to think about the employer being the user, and that can inform how we behave and how we prepare. I caught some of Anna's talk, and it was excellent. She was sharing a lot of similar tips to the sort of techniques I use. And so she mentioned the job description, the job specification. They tend to have different names: person specification, the role criteria. They are all basically doing the same thing. They are setting out the sort of capabilities you need to have, the duties you will perform. Recruitment is literally a tick box exercise. You are aiming to tick as many of the boxes on their form as possible. And the job description tells you exactly what those boxes are. So if you can get the official document from them, great. Quite often they will display it up front in their they'll display it in the advert. Sometimes the job advert itself will effectively be a job description. Other times you can put it together for yourself, you can see what they want, what the job involves, and you can sort of construct a job description that you can work from. So yes, as part of our user research, we want to acknowledge that the employer is the user. The job description is going to spell out exactly the boxes that they want ticked to be happy. We can also perform a little bit of user research. We can create a user story for our interviewer. So what is the user going to be like that we're going to be meet? Their user story is going to start off as an interviewer. I want to jump through the hoops that have been set for me, because the person interviewing us almost certainly isn't a HR professional, like, or maybe for one, if you've got a multi-stage interview process, they might be someone from HR for one of them, but most of the interviews are going to be from people doing the job, the managers of the job. They're not going to be interviewers full-time. They've been given a list of boxes to tick, a list of hoops to jump through, and they want to just get through it so that they can go back to the other parts of their job. Even people who like doing job interviews probably have other stuff that they need to do more. So yeah, job interviewing is stressful, being on the other side of the transaction as well. You will find, once you've been in the team for a while, once you're asked to take part in interviews, it's quite stressful in a different way to being the candidate, but it is still stressful. So if we know this about our user, we can adapt our approach using the principles of user interaction. So the first principle I want to talk about is putting clarity first. I'm going to say that my slides are a demonstration of this principle in action. There are no distractions. There are no like confusing elements that are taking away from the pure clarity of my white text on a black background. Similarly, when you're designing a site or an app, it can be attractive, but that shouldn't come at the cost of being able to see what's going on. You want it to be as clear as possible, like what a user can do and how they can do it. If we apply that thinking to a job interview, then we need to remember the context of the conversation. Job interviews are really weird social transactions. Like, you will barely ever have a conversation that is similar to a job interview. About the closest scenario I can think of is being on a first date. Because it is this weird transactional conversation, you need to keep that in mind while you're talking. We know that we're trying to sell ourselves. The employer is trying to make a judgment about us. And there are multiple factors that they're trying to take in at once. The first that's going to spring to most people's minds is the skills and experience. They need to judge whether you have the skills they need to do the job. And if you've got experience doing a similar role, then fantastic. That's a very quick illustration that you do indeed have the skills that they need. However, that's only part of the picture. They are also looking to assess your personal qualities. So this is what Anna was mentioning about, they want to be able to tell, is this someone I'm going to be happy working with 40 hours a week? So your personal qualities would be your communication style, your enthusiasm, your attitude to each interaction. And so these are things that they can pick up from you passively while they're interrogating you about other things. And then finally, what they're also looking for is your motivation and enthusiasm for the role. And if we take these areas, the third one is actually the most important, and that's the one that you should try and think about standing out in. Because if you think about it, skills and experience seem intuitively like they would be the most important aspect, but they've seen your CV, right? They've read in detail about your past. Maybe they made you fill in an epic application form. they have a pretty good idea of your skills and experience already. In fact, they might be inviting 10 different people to interview for the role, and all 10 of those people meet the requirement for the skills and experience as far as they're concerned. Like, they've looked at the CVs. They wouldn't have invited people for an interview if they didn't think they were capable of ticking those boxes. So the area that you're actually going to stand out is in the motivation and enthusiasm department. Like, so as Anna was saying, if you can bring up that you know someone in the company and that you're excited about working there, or that you watched a talk from their CEO, those are going to convey to them that you really want the job. I am a big fan in just being explicit and telling them, I really want this job. I am excited about working at this company. Like, if you can honestly say that, say it. And it's remarkable how many candidates won't. I don't know whether it's like a British cultural thing, maybe, but a lot of people are very reluctant to come forwards and say, I actually want this job. I would really like to work here. They like to just let the assumption lie. Like, I'm in the interview. Of course I want the job. Why would I be here if I wasn't? But if you come out and say it explicitly, you will stand out. That will be memorable for them. Yeah. So it's all about remembering the context of the conversation. Like a first date, you're trying to make a good impression. You're trying to be yourself, but you're trying to be a sort of cut down, optimized version of yourself with a specific goal in mind. You're trying to come across positively, make a connection, and convince them that you are interested in them and they should also be interested in you. Yeah. So the next principle of user interface design is we want to conserve their attention. We don't want to distract them with unnecessary details. We don't want to go off on tangents that aren't relevant to their role or to your place in the company. We don't want to make them start thinking about somebody else. We want them to think about us. We want their attention to be on us and on the ways that we can tick the boxes and get the job. So, yeah, we can anticipate the kinds of things that they're interested in, and that can help us guide us even when the questions get weird, when they get strange, or even when they don't get strange. Because of the unique context of a job interview, an ordinary question can spin out in a very strange way. They might ask some very generic, open, introductory question. Tell me about yourself. And if you start talking about, oh, well, I like dark chocolate, hairless cats, long walks on the beach, like, you might start talking as if you were writing a dating profile. Those aren't necessarily the parts of yourself that they want to hear. So, what I recommend you do is take a mental step backwards. If you are asked a question that you're puzzled by, or you're not sure how to answer, ask yourself, why are they asking this question? And a quick follow-up, what don't they want to hear? Because that will probably be pretty clear to you what they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear about irrelevant stuff. They don't want to hear that you're a compulsive pyromaniac, or that you have interpersonal problems with everyone that you've worked with. What that should lead you to whittle down to what they do want to hear. They want to hear about your positive traits, the traits that are suitable for the role. So when they ask you a generic, oh, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you can say is, I'm a budding technologist. I'm very enthusiastic about learning new languages, really interested in the way people cooperate and collaborate when they're writing code. I've got great communication skills from previous customer service roles that I've done. You can immediately start bringing up things that they want to hear. And again, I always tie this back to the person specification, the job criteria. You can be literally ticking boxes yourself. Like, I recommend having your copy of the job description with you as part of your interview prep. and make a point of like, have I ticked this box yet? Let's make sure I can add an answer that ticks that box. So some common gotcha interview questions, if you use this technique, they become a little bit easier to handle. So when they say something like what are your weaknesses, that's like the classic thorn in the side interview question. Like, what are your weaknesses? Why are they asking this question? They're not actually asking if you take double damage from ice attacks or if you've got a weak joint in your shoulder. What don't they want to hear? They don't want to hear about a weakness that would be critical to failing the job. So what do they want to hear? They want to hear about your self-knowledge. They want to hear that you are aware of where you have limitations and that you have techniques in place to overcome those limitations. So well, what is my greatest weakness? Well, sometimes I can fall victim to hyperfocus, where if I'm getting into a particular problem, I'll block out all distractions and really tunnel into it. And actually, I can lose track of time that way. I have been known to skip meetings or miss other deadlines because I get hyperfocused on one specific thing. However, I know that about myself. So what I will do, I've got Pomodoro timers, I've got a physical timer and a digital one. I will time box my efforts. So when I'm getting into a problem, I will set a timer. And when the timer goes, I'll step away from it and make sure that I'll meet my other commitments. So you can share a real weakness, but you can also show them that you have the awareness to mitigate that weakness. If they ask you something like, where do you see yourself in 2 years' time? Like, why are they asking this question? They don't actually want you to picture where you are in 2 years. It's not a literal thing. What don't they want to hear? They don't want to hear that you're going to be rich living on a Caribbean island after you set up a cryptocurrency scheme and then rug pulled it. So what do they want to hear? They want to hear that you're thinking about them in the long term. They want to hear that you're going to be committed to them. Oh, in 2 years, I can definitely still see myself with this company. Perhaps I'll have moved up in those levels, or I've taken on more responsibility. I would like to be involved in the onboarding process to get more people coming in. So yeah, bear in mind the context of the conversation. They want to hear that you want the job. They want to hear that you're going to be committed to the job, that you're enthusiastic about it, and that you're in it for the long haul. Yeah. So the last element of user interface design I'm going to talk about is reducing cognitive load. So you want your interview persona to be accessible, not distracting, and you want the information to pass over to them with them doing the smallest amount of thinking possible. It should be very easy for them to understand where you're coming from, what you bring to the table, and they shouldn't have to spend much effort sorting out what you're telling them. There is quite a common interview preparation technique called the STAR technique, which you might well have observed. You might have come across it in your research. I am a huge believer in this technique. And I'll quickly run through. Oh, okay. So the first thing to say is that the STAR technique is aimed to answer competency-based questions. And a competency-based question is a question that follows the format. Give me an example of when you have done X. So they are asking, tell me about a time that you have done Y. They want to be told a story about a specific time that you've demonstrated a skill that they will need you to show. STAR stands for scene, task, action, result. Or sometimes situation or setting, task, action, result. And this is just a fancy way of saying beginning, middle, and end. Like every story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the trick with these questions is when somebody says to you, give me an example of when you have done X, it can be very, very easy to start talking in general terms. If somebody says to me, give me an example of a time you've solved a technical problem, I might start talking, oh, I write Python all the time, and I always solve technical problems. Like every day is a technical problem. And that hasn't answered the question. They said, give me an example. They don't want to hear general platitudes. They want one concrete example of what you've done. So when you're telling your story, the first thing that you should talk about is the scene, the setting, where the story is happening, which part of your life. And generally, you want to set out where on your CV you're talking about. So if you're talking about a job, start off with that as a customer service assistant at a supermarket, or as a contributor to popular open source projects XYZ, or in my last role as a junior developer at startup. So this doesn't have to be long, but it just sets the scene. And if you probably will be asked multiple questions that follow this format. And if you're telling stories that keep on going back to the same job, don't skip this step. Make it clear each time. So, yes. So as in my last answer, when I was contributing to this open source project, what you need to bear in mind is your interviewer is seeing a lot of people. Like I said, they're just trying to jump through the hoops they've been given so that they can get back to their job. They have difficulty keeping everything straight in their head. So if you can make it as foolproof as possible and as easy for them to understand, that's the best way to go. So quickly set the scene. Next, talk about the specific task you were doing. So this is where we zoom in on the one particular incident. This is where we let them know that we are giving them an example and not talking in generalities. So as a contributor to an open source project, I had one particular issue filed that was illustrating a problem in the documentation with a series of broken links. Again, this part doesn't need to be long, but it needs to let them know that you are answering the question. You're giving them one concrete example. Next, the action. This is where you actually sell yourself. This should be the longest part of your story by a long way. This is where you set out all of your skills. You need to go into more detail than you think you do. Because if you're good at something, you just do it. It's second nature to you. But in a job interview, you can't just say, I'm good at it, so I did it. You need to break down all the little steps you did, and that will demonstrate how you were good, how you sort of excelled at your role. So as a contributor to an open source project, I had one particular issue that was talking about broken documentation. So what I did was I read the issue multiple times to make sure I understood what they were reporting. I verified that the links were in fact broken. I need to check with person A and person B about where the source of truth should be. I checked with person C about the desired formatting just to make sure that it was consistent with the new brand of documentation that we were doing. And then I opened a pull request, got reviews from the appropriate people, spell it all out in lots of detail. And then finally, you want to give the result of what actually happened. And as a result, the issue was closed, our documentation was up to date, all of the links were proved to be working, all of the images were loading, users were happy. So telling a story in that very structured scene, task, action, result way, it's not hard, but it can be difficult to do when you're under pressure. If somebody asks you in an interview, it's very easy for your mind to go blank and for no example to pop into your head. So my strong advice is prepare a batch of these stories in advance. And the way to do it is you look at the job descriptions for the jobs you're aiming for, pick out the recurring skills. Like everybody is going to want someone that's good at teamwork, everybody that wants someone that can work effectively alone, solving technical problems, communicating with users or other stakeholders. There will be a bunch of recurring themes that you will definitely want to prepare stories for. And I recommend you write out those stories, like actually plot them out. Make sure you've got a clear scene and a clear task and a lengthy action that makes you sound good. and then top it off with a result. And practice telling those stories. Keep on rehearsing them. And the thing is, once you've written them out and you've practiced them, you will be able to distill them down into keywords. So my story about fixing links on documentation, I can just write docs links, and that will tell me what I need to know. That will remind me of the story I want to tell. And furthermore, I can add the word docs links to my interview notes. I can have their job description, and next to where it says detail orientated, I'll write docs links. And then if they ask me, give me a question about a time you've solved a technical problem. If I do freeze up, I'm going to say to them, I'm sorry, can I just check my notes? And what that's doing is, firstly, it's telling them I've made notes, which is reinforcing this idea that I really want this job. It's also, it's helping us. So you're showing them, I knew I would be nervous about this, and I've found a way to mitigate it. And then you can look at your notes. I'll see the word docs link and I'll go, yes, I remember. Okay, so when I was working on this open source project, and that can help me recover from a potential blank. But also that same story, if I've rehearsed it and I'm comfortable with it, I can spin it. If the question is about meeting a tough deadline, maybe I tell the same story, but suddenly we only had one day to get all of these doc links fixed. So I can tell the same story, but this time I emphasize how quickly I worked and how I met the deadline. Or maybe the story, they're asking for an example of collaboration. So again, that story might come in handy, but this time I emphasized the communication aspects and how I got everybody involved. If you've got a stable of 8 or 10 or 12 of these stories, you should feel a lot more comfortable and confident. You've got those stories prepared. Those stories make you look good, and often they'll make you look good in multiple different ways. So no matter what, give me an example question they ask you, one of your stories can be massaged to fit the bill. And even if they don't phrase the question like that, if they just say, in this job, deadlines are important, you can respond with, oh yeah, that's great. I'm great with deadlines. Let me give you an example. When I worked on this open source project. And so, yeah, have your stories prepared, rehearse them and rehearse altering them on the fly, and you will be able to cope with almost any problem that is thrown at you. Right. I have no idea how long I've been speaking for. Yeah, okay. So the other thing about making those notes, I will quite often literally show them the notes. I will, like, if it's a remote interview, I'll hold them up to the webcam and going, look, I really want this job. So I've made all of these notes in an effort to make a good impression. And to follow on with something Anna was saying, nerves are good. So if you are nervous in an interview, it shows that you want the job. If you were completely cool as a cucumber, that might come across as indifference. Whereas if you're nervous, you can say to them, please excuse me if I'm a bit nervous, but you see, I'm very excited about this role and I'd love to join your company. Like, turn it into a positive. Okay, so I think that brings me to the end of my content, and it did work out to be about 30 minutes. So yeah, thank you. Are there questions?